Now, for more on what this trial means for Egypt, we're joined in the studio by Cole Bockenfeld. He is the Advocacy Director at the Project on Middle East Democracy. Cole, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
A lot to talk about. Firstly, let's pick up Secretary Kerry's unannounced visit. He met with the foreign minister as well as the interim president. Would you like to have been in on that meeting? What do you think that all the sides talked about?
Well, absolutely. I think it was definitely a tense meeting. There's been no secret that relations are pretty strained right now between the U.S. and Egypt. So I think this trip was really to try and mend those relationships, to explain the aid decision, to see how progress is going on the roadmap forward, and see that they're making the kinds of progress the U.S. would like to see there.
When you talk about explaining the aid, it's the fact that the U.S. is continuing its humanitarian aid, some economic aid, but very publicly said we are not going to provide military aid right now. The fact that so many Egyptians hoped that there wouldn't be a military regime behind power right now, that had to be the driving factor behind that. You were there about a year and a half ago. What do you think the rank and file is thinking right now? Clearly, the Arab Spring seems so long ago. People had such hope, and now it just seems like it has fizzled, and the Brotherhood is fighting, the people that aren't incarcerated right now. Where is the country?
Well, I think there's a lot of frustration with how things are going, with the leadership changes we've seen over the last couple of years, but also a lot of frustration with U.S. policy, what people really view as lacking credibility, any sense of principles or values, that the U.S. is willing to back whoever's in power, and not being very clear about the kind of Egypt it would like to see, the kind of government it would like to see, and willing to back that up. And I think that's causing a lot of frustration on the street there.
Can you expand a bit on that? What do you think the U.S. would like to see? I mean, a democracy that operated perfectly, but that's down the road.
Well, I think at this point, the expectations have been tempered. I think President Obama at the UN a month or so ago made that very clear, that our priorities in the region have shifted, and now we're really going back to our strategic interests. And although it would be nice to have democracy and nice to have basic freedoms and so on, that those are secondary interests. So I think the administration has really backpedaled on that.
When you hear Secretary Kerry say he believes Egypt is on the path to democracy, your thoughts on that?
Well, the generals in charge and the interim government have made some steps forward in terms of pushing a constitution.
The generals in charge and democracy don't work hand in hand.
Correct. They made some step forward to try and get a constitution, to try and get elections going so that they can officially turn over power. But as we saw under President Morsi, democracy is about more than just elections. It's about political behavior. And the more they're clamping down on protests in the streets, cracking down on freedom of expression, free media, and then the trial tomorrow. There's no way this is an inclusive process.
Quickly, how do you think that this could spiral out of control again? I mean, if the Brotherhood is calling for mass demonstrations, I'm sure they're going to know where the trial is going to take place, and I'm sure there are going to be protesters out there.
Well, this is going to be extremely tense. I don't think there's any secret that this trial of former President Morsi and 14 of his top aides is politically motivated. If you take those key 15 people out of the picture, all of their supporters will feel that they have no other options to work politically, and that's when things get really dangerous.
Wow. You know, I'd like to talk so much more about this, Cole. Thanks very much for joining us here. We want to have you back, especially after we see how this trial goes, and then Hosni Mubarak goes on trial. It's not going away.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks very much for joining us.